For centuries, Europe has been seen as a continent of kingdoms, empires, and civilizations that shaped the world. But beneath the surface of its history lies a mystery almost no one talks about, a biblical mystery. Because according to ancient manuscripts, forgotten genealogies, and early Semitic traditions, the origin of European peoples is not simply historical, but ancestral, rooted in a lineage that begins immediately after the flood. And today, you're about to walk into a story older than Rome, older than Greece, older than the very languages spoken across Europe. A story hidden in plain sight, inside the pages of the scriptures. This is a forbidden lineage of Europe. Imagine Europe not as a continent, but as a massive tapestry woven from dozens of nations. Germany, France, Italy, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Greece. Their cultures differ. Their languages differ. Their histories differ. And yet, they all share a single, ancient father. A man whose name appears quietly in Genesis 10, but whose legacy echoes across every European nation. His name was Japheth. In schools, we learn about Noah and his Arkansas, but rarely do we hear about what happened after the waters receded. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Shem became the ancestor of the Semitic peoples. Ham became the ancestor of African and Middle Eastern civilizations. And Japheth became the father of something vast. The ancient Hebrews used to call Europeans simply the peoples of Japheth. His name, in Hebrew, carries meanings like beautiful, pale expansion, multiplication. In other words, a lineage destined to spread, destined to grow, destined to fill the unknown corners of the world. And spread they did. Genesis 10 reveals Japheth's 7 sons. From these 7 names, the entire map of Europe begins to unfold like a prophecy. Their names might sound unfamiliar, almost mythical. Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, Tiras, names that seem forgotten. But each one of them became the root of an entire civilization. Each one a seed that would blossom into kingdoms, tribes, and cultures. From Gomer came a grandson named Ashkenaz. For thousands of years, Jewish scholars referred to regions of Germany and surrounding areas as the lands of Ashkenaz. To them, Ashkenaz wasn't a myth. He was a primordial ancestor of Germans, Austrians, Dutch, and other Germanic tribes. Even today, the term Ashkenazi Jews refers to Jewish communities living in traditionally Germanic areas. The echo of Ashkenaz's name still lives inside the identity of millions. Another mysterious descendant appears, Japheth. Ancient traditions claim that he became the father of the Celtic peoples. Yes, the Celts, Irish, Scots, Welsh, Bretons. Cultures known for their spiraling knotwork, haunting music, warrior aristocracies, and deep-rooted mythologies. Their symbols, their folklore, even many of their linguistic peculiarities are traced back to Japheth, the grandson of Japheth. The Celtic world, the Druids, the Gaelic legends, all rooted in a single ancient name, quietly written in Genesis. Then comes Madai, another son of Japheth. He became the progenitor of the Medes, one of the oldest Iranian peoples. From him came Persians, Parthians, and nearly all ancient Iranian tribes. A European patriarch who gave rise to a Middle Eastern empire. It sounds strange at first glance, but ancient civilizations were far more interconnected than modern conquest, trade. Humanity has always moved like rivers across continents. And Madai's descendants shaped empires that stood side by side with Babylon, Assyria, and Greece. Their influence reached from the mountains of Iran to the edges of Europe. These were not small tribes living in isolated valleys. They were kingdoms, organized, disciplined, ambitious. Civilizations capable of diplomacy, warfare, architecture, and religion. The world remembers them to the names of their capitals, their kings, and the empires they challenged. But behind all of it stands Madai, a man whose name rests quietly in a list of genealogies read by almost no one. And then, moving deeper into Genesis 10, we reach the most feared and mysterious names of all, Tubal, Meshech, and Magog. Names that echo like thunder across the corridors of biblical prophecy. Names mentioned not only in Genesis, but in Ezekiel, in the Psalms, and even in the apocalyptic visions of Revelation. These are not minor characters. They are pillars in prophetic landscape, shadows stretching from the ancient world into the final days. Tubal and Meshech appear together so often in Scripture that they became inseparable in the minds of ancient scholars. Early Greek historians wrote of tribes near the Black Sea whose names resembled theirs. Byzantine records mention peoples whose languages and customs aligned with early Slavic and Proto-Slavic groups. For centuries, historians and theologians connected Tubal and Meshech with regions stretching from eastern Turkey all the way into Russia. These connections weren't modern theories. They were accepted traditions stretching back more than 2,000 years. And then there is Magog, the most enigmatic of all. His name is wrapped in layers of prophecy, fear, and fascination. Ezekiel speaks of a great northern confederation rising in the last days, a people coming from the far north, a kingdom feared by nations. Revelation describes Magog as part of a final uprising at the end of time. To ancient scholars, this wasn't symbolic poetry. Magog was a real patriarch, a real bloodline, one whose descendants inhabited the cold lands of the north, lands vast, rugged, and powerful, lands we now associate with Russia, Ukraine, and Eastern Europe. In their minds, Magog wasn't just a name, he was a prophecy written into flesh. Another enigmatic name stands quietly in the genealogy, Tiras. Few people today recognize it, but ancient historians wrote about a tribe known as the Tersonoi, a seafaring people who settled in the Italian peninsula long before Rome was even a thought. These Tersonoi are what we now call the Etruscans, one of the most mysterious civilizations in history. Their art, their writing, their architecture, even their religious symbols influenced Rome so deeply that many of Rome's earliest kings were believed to be of Etruscan descent. Before Caesar, before the Senate, before Latin literature, there were the Etruscans, and behind them stands Tiras, son of Japheth. Italy, its temples, its emperors, its empire that shaped the West, all carry the fingerprints of his lineage. But the most influential branch of all, the one that shaped philosophy, science, literature, politics, and the entire worldview of the West, comes from Javan, son of Japheth. Javan is the biblical name for Ionia, a region of Greece known for philosophers, mathematicians, and poets. From Javan came 4 sons. Elisha, believed to be the progenitor of the early Greeks, possibly linked to the Aeolians. Tarshish, associated with the Iberian Peninsula, modern Spain and Portugal. Kittim, associated with Cyprus and Mediterranean maritime peoples. Dodonim, linked to the ancient Trojans and possibly the people of Rhodes. Even the word Hellen, root of Hellenic, referring to Greece, may echo the early descendants of Javan. From the single biblical patriarch, an entire civilization emerged, a civilization that gave the world geometry, astronomy, democracy, theater, philosophy, and rational inquiry. From Javan came Greece. From Greece came Western civilization. And yet, beneath all that brilliance lies something more ancient, something whispered by rabbis and carried through oral traditions. The belief that humanity once spoke a single language, the Adamic language, a tongue unbroken, pure, universal. But after the Tower of Babel, everything shattered, words splintered, languages formed, nations drifted apart. And yet fragments of that original language remain scattered across the world like pieces of a broken mirror. Hebrew preserved some, Aramaic preserved some, Greek preserved some, Latin preserved some. Even modern Greek, with its elegant shapes and enduring phonetics, carries echoes of that primeval speech. Europe's languages diverged, evolving into Germanic, Celtic, Slavic, Romance, Baltic families. But their deepest roots remain connected, branches growing from the same trunk. And that trunk traces back to the descendants of Japheth. When you step back and examine the entire picture, when you follow every name, every tribe, every migration, when you trace the bloodlines from the mountains of Armenia to the forests of Germany, from the fields of Ireland to the steppes of Russia, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. All European peoples, Celts, Germanics, Slavs, Greeks, Italians, Iberians, trace their origin to Japheth, a single family, a single bloodline. A single moment in history when the floodwaters receded, the earth was silent, and 3 brothers stepped onto a reborn world. Europe wasn't formed by chance. Its nations didn't appear at random. They follow a pattern, a genealogy, A map written long before kingdoms rose or languages were spoken. A story forgotten by many, but preserved in the scriptures. So the next time you look at Europe, its flags, its cultures, its ancient ruins, its modern nations, remember this. Behind every border, every tongue, every tradition stands one ancient patriarch, a man named Japheth, whose descendants filled an entire continent. This is the origin of Europe, a lineage both historical and sacred, a story older than civilization itself. And in the next episode, we will travel east, into deserts, mountains, and forgotten kingdoms, as we uncover the biblical origin of Asia. Until then, stay curious and stay awake.